Good morning, Title I coordinators. Thanks for joining us this morning for our August Title I webinar. My name is Erin Suddeth, and I'm the Title I Part A branch manager here at KDE. And I also have a colleague with me today. I will let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm David Malonti, one of the assistant directors in the Division of School and Program Improvement.
All right, and let me get our PowerPoint pulled up. It always takes a minute to get it presenting to everybody. There we go. All right, and just remember as you're joining us, make sure that you have yourselves on mute. Okay, we will get started. So as always, just a couple logistics before we get started. Remember, you can submit questions or comments in the chat in Teams if you're joining us through Teams. You can also send an email to me at erin.suddeth@education.ky.gov. And as always, our webinars are recorded and posted on our Title I documents and resources page, usually within the day that they're broadcast, or maybe the next day we'll get that up for everyone. A quick recap from our July webinar. We talked about some minor updates made to the handbook. We also talked about the fiscal year 2023 GMAP, Grant Management Application and Planning application. Remember, that is due on August 31st. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. We also discussed some common application issues to maybe help everybody's applications not be sent back. So if you didn't check that out, if you didn't join us last month, be sure to go back and watch that so you can address any of those issues you might have. We also discussed how to correctly report the enrollment and low income data that you put into GMAP. That's on the school eligibility page. That is something that we've seen somewhat commonly during our monitoring. So that's another good part of the video to go and check out if you weren't able to join us. And as always, we just had some different reminders. So our agenda today, we've got some more reminders. We're going to talk about the carryover waiver for 2021-22 funds. And then we're going to talk about the annual Title I meeting requirement that does apply to all schools that receive Title I funds. So we'll start off with our reminders, and I just said this a minute ago. The fiscal year 2023 consolidated application is open in GMAP, and it is due on August 31st, 2022. And couple reminders, I know we went over these last time, but we can never say them enough. We do review applications in the order in which they are submitted, and we really appreciate your patience as our consultants are working to review all those applications. It always takes a little bit longer to review them when they first come in because we're looking at the entire thing. We also have some new consultants who are kind of learning the ropes. So again, we really appreciate your patience. And as I said a minute ago, our July webinar does outline some common application issues. So it might be beneficial for you to go back and rewatch that prior to submitting your application. I know we have a lot of new coordinators with us as well. Our next reminder is about our statewide federal programs training that we are providing at no cost to the districts. This is where we're going to have the Brustein and Manasevit legal firm come down to Lexington and provide this training. It is September 20th through the 22nd. Remember, it is the same content all 3 days, so you just pick one day, and many of you have already registered for that. The registration is going to remain open until the training occurs. When I send out the announcement that the PowerPoint and the recording have been added to the webinar, I'll be sure to include a link to register for the training. If you've already registered, you should have received a confirmation email from Leslie Bridges. Leslie's our new administrative specialist, so you may not have recognized that name when it came across your email, but that should have had some confirmation about what day you selected to attend and some more information about those of you who have requested hotel rooms. Now, if you've registered just within the last few days, you may not have an email from Leslie yet, but that will be coming. If you've registered quite a while ago, you go back and check and you don't see an email from Leslie, go ahead and reach out to me and I'll make sure that we get that information to you. And our last reminder is about Title I admin. We've talked about this a couple times. Remember, KDE is providing all the districts with access to Title I admin for the 2022-23 school year. It's a subscription service for you. You should have gotten an email from Teresa Haar. She's not from KDE. She is from LRP Media Group. They're the ones who are in charge of Title I admin. And that email had information about a licensure agreement that the district needs to complete, as well as a staff access list. Who do you want to receive those email updates in your district? You do need to complete that and send that back to Teresa before you can get your access. And once that's sent, they will also provide you with some kind of training, a little bit of a walkthrough of the system. We've had a couple districts reach out, making sure that this is a legitimate offer. It is, so you can go ahead and complete that and get that back to Teresa if you haven't already done so. All right, we're going to start with the carryover limitation. This is in section 1127A of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, and that section states that not more than 15% of the funds allocated to the district for any fiscal year may remain available for obligation for one additional fiscal year. So that means that districts need to ensure that at least 85% of their school year 2021-22 Title I Part A funds are obligated for activities that occur no later than September 30th of 2022. Now, as stated in ESSA 1127C, this carryover limitation does not apply to districts that receive less than $50,000 in their Title I Part A funds for the fiscal year. We do have a couple of those districts, but most of us are going to have to meet this carryover requirement. Now, typically, ESSA 1127B allows KDE to waive this carryover limitation for districts once every 3 years if the district meets the following conditions. If we determine that the district's request is reasonable and necessary, or if supplemental appropriations for this subpart have become available. Now, due to the impacts of COVID-19, the U.S. Department of Education has granted KDE a waiver of that carryover limitation for the 2021-2022 school year, and that is Project 310I. Districts who have taken this waiver within the past 3 years are going to be eligible to take it again if they need it. We've seen this a couple times because of COVID. Now, be advised that if you take this waiver this year, you may not be able to take it again within the next few years. We don't know if there's going to be another waiver from USAID related to COVID. So, be on the safe side, go ahead and plan as if there is not going to be another waiver. And if you take it this year, you will have to wait another 3 years before you can take it. Districts wishing to request a carryover waiver for their 21-22 funds may do so no later than September 30th, and you're going to email David. When you send him that email, you need to include the following information. State that the district requests a carryover waiver of the 15% carryover limitation for school year 2021-22 funds. Provide the reason for the excess carryover and describe your plan for effectively using those carryover funds. So now we're going to switch gears to kind of our main topic of today's webinar, which is the Title I annual meeting. And this is a school level requirement, so it's really important for you as district coordinators to review this information with principals of Title I schools. It may even be beneficial to have your principals watch the recording of this webinar once it becomes available. And it'll be good for not only new Title I principals, but principals who've been around for a while as well. Components of the annual meeting are a frequent finding during our monitoring visits. We've seen that quite a bit over the past few years. So it's important to ensure not only that this meeting is taking place, but that the right information is being shared with parents during the meeting. So that's what we're going to focus on today. ESSA 1116C, C1, sorry, states that each school served under Title I Part A shall convene an annual meeting at a convenient time to which all parents of participating children shall be invited and encouraged to attend. And at this meeting, you're supposed to inform parents of the following: their school's participation under Title I Part A, explain the program requirements, obviously not very in depth, and explain the rights of parents to be involved. So when we think about scheduling the annual meeting, holding the meeting at the beginning of the school year really helps set the tone and establish the expectations for the rest of the year. Now, ESSA doesn't specify a deadline by which the meeting must occur or a specific month or anything like that. However, we at KDE do recommend that this meeting take place before the end of October. Pairing the annual meeting with another event, such as an open house, or maybe you have like a parent conference night school-wide, that could result in better attendance and participation. You may also consider having a flexible number of meetings to ensure a large number of parents can attend. That may not be possible for you, but if it is, it's something that you can consider. So the information that needs to be shared with parents, as I said a minute ago, is very important. So a lot of schools opt to use a resource like a PowerPoint presentation to share their information with parents. Obviously, that's not required to have a PowerPoint or a handout or something like that, but a lot of districts and schools have found over the years that this is an effective means of sharing information. It's also something that could maybe be posted to the school website afterwards. Some districts choose to create kind of a PowerPoint template or a handout template for their schools to use just to ensure consistency and make sure that the appropriate information is being shared at each school. And then the schools can go in and customize parts of it with their individual information. So some of the benefits to using something like a PowerPoint or a handout, like I said, it ensures that all of the information is being shared with parents. It provides strong documentation of the annual meeting in the event of monitoring. A few months ago, our webinar, we did talk about strong documentation, kind of things that you want to have in the event that you're selected. And as I just said, it could be posted on the school's webpage to ensure parents can access that information either at a later date, or maybe parents whose students enroll midway through the year, they miss the annual meeting. It can be there as a reference for them. So as we mentioned on the previous slide, the purpose of the meeting is to notify parents about the school's participation in Title I Part A, as well as explaining program requirements and the rights of those parents to be involved. So we're going to look at some guiding questions that schools and districts can use to kind of help shape however they decide to present that information. So these questions can help schools provide some high-level information about Title I. And as you prepare information to share with parents, remember that throughout ESSA, there's an emphasis on presenting information to parents in a language they can understand. And this is more than just providing information in a language other than English when necessary. This also means that you need to consider your audience and try to keep your message free of a lot of really technical jargon and terms that people outside of the education field may not understand. So we're going to look at each of these guiding questions a little bit. So the first question, what is Title I Part A? Well, it's one of the largest federal programs supporting elementary and secondary education. What does it mean to be a Title I school? That means that our school receives supplemental funds to help ensure that all children have a fair, equal, and significant opportunity to obtain a high-quality education. How did our school qualify for Title I services? Title I funds are targeted to districts and schools in the greatest need based on the percentage of low-income families served by the school. How does our school use its Title I funds? Now, this doesn't have to be a breakdown of every single expenditure and specific amounts, but just a general idea of how the funds are used at that school. For example, you might say something like, funds are used to address identified needs across the school. Our school uses funds to provide additional teachers and paraeducators, as well as supplies such as technology, books, etc. What does our school have to do to comply with Title I regulations? And again, this doesn't have to be every requirement of Title I. It'd be a very long presentation if it had to. So again, consider the audience and focus on the components related to parents. For example, we monitor data points such as test scores, behavior data, and parent feedback to ensure that resources we purchase with Title I funds are having a positive impact on student success. We also have requirements related to parent and family engagement, including creating a parent and family engagement policy, as well as a school family compact. We also host parent and family engagement events, such as our, for example, math night, to help parents take an active role in their child's education. And our last guiding question, what is the role of a parent in a Title I school? Parents are stakeholders who provide us with feedback about our Title I program. We ask for parent input when we create documents such as the policy and compact. We also use survey data as well as our parent advisory council, if the school has one, to discuss the needs of parents and how parent and family engagement funds might be spent. ESSA 1116A3B states that parents and family members of children receiving services under this part shall be involved in the decisions regarding how funds reserved under this section are allotted for parental involvement activities. That's something that we sometimes see as missing from the presentation that's provided to parents at this annual meeting. I talked about this just a minute ago. We discussed examples of strong documentation. That was during our June webinar. So if you weren't able to join us for that, be sure to go back and watch that, because we did talk specifically about some examples of parent and family engagement documentation. So when we think about documenting the annual meeting, we want to have evidence that all parents were invited to attend the meeting. So maybe was there a flyer, email, social media posts, things like that that had to do with the meeting. When we think about the meeting invitation, it needs to be made clear to parents that the Title I program will be discussed. And we talked about this during the June webinar. Keep in mind that not all parents and guardians have social media. So sharing announcements only on social media is not recommended because you're missing a section of that parent population. Sometimes we do see invitations like a flyer, maybe for open house, but there's no reference to Title I on there. There's no way for us to know that the Title I program was discussed at the open house. So you want to make sure that that information is conveyed to parents however you are inviting them. You're also going to want to document the information that was shared with parents. So if you used a PowerPoint presentation or a handout, if you used a meeting agenda or minutes. And I want to provide just a little bit of clarification regarding informational handouts. Let's see. If I was monitoring a district and one of the pieces of evidence that was uploaded was a informational handout, I would ask the school about how that handout was shared with parents. ESSA does specify that this requirement is a meeting. So simply giving parents a handout about Title I would not be sufficient. That's not a meeting. If the handout went along with a presentation, now that would be acceptable. So you want to be sure that this evidence is saved in a way that would allow KDE staff to read the information that was provided to parents. So on that note, I have a kind of specific example that we've seen a couple times. Some schools structure their open house events with parents and students visiting like different booths set up in the cafeteria or the gym, and they get information about the different programs. And sometimes there's a Title I booth. Um, Whether you have a staff member working at that booth or it's just a display board with program information and handouts, again, this by itself is not going to constitute a meeting because ESSA does specify that a meeting take place. Now, if the school maybe presents all of the Title I information to parents at the beginning of the event, and there's a booth set up, or maybe parents can go and ask a staff member questions, that would be fine. In that scenario, you just want to make sure that the staff member is managing the booth. They're able to answer the parents' questions. If you have a display board up, be sure to save the information that was on the display board to verify that this information was shared as a piece of your effective documentation. Sometimes we'll see kind of a faraway picture of the display board, but we can't see what's on it, so it's hard to verify exactly what was shared in that portion. And then evidence of parent attendance of the meeting. So something like a sign-in sheet would be effective documentation. Thinking about accessibility of the annual meeting. Parent and family engagement programs are intended to build the capacity for involvement and engagement for all parents. And as with any event, the annual meeting should be accessible to all parents and families, including those who may have limited English proficiency, those with disabilities, migrant or immigrant families, families experiencing homelessness. So you need to consider how your district and or schools work to reach these families. A little note on maybe parents and families with limited English proficiency. Parents with limited English proficiency may or may not be the parents of your English learner students. Just as a parent who's fluent in English may have a child who is an English learner, a child who's fluent in English may have parents who are not. So kind of think to yourselves and think about this with your principals. What are some of the things you can do to make it easier for all families to attend meetings and events? And we have a couple ideas and tips on the next slide. First, create a welcoming environment for parents and families. So do all families feel welcome in the building? Do they know where they can go if they have questions? For example, if you have parents who are maybe new to the country and the culture, they may not be familiar with how the school-family relationship works in the States. What about parents who may have had a negative experience with the school system in the past? They're only used to hearing bad news from the school. We want to make sure that they know that they can get positive news from the school as well. Be sure to host your annual meeting and really any parent event that you have at a convenient time. So some parents may have work schedules that prevent them from attending events at a certain time. I kind of mentioned this before, providing information in a format and language parents can understand. And just to kind of reiterate, in addition to providing information in languages other than English when necessary, be sure that you're keeping that technical jargon to a minimum. You may want to incorporate a virtual attendance option when you can. It may not always be possible, but some districts and schools actually saw an increase in parent attendance when a virtual option was provided during the pandemic. And I know several have decided to continue offering a virtual component to some of their events because of that increase they observed. So like I said, it may not be feasible for all events, but it's just something to keep in mind. And finally, ESSA 1116C2 states that Title I Part A parent engagement funds may be used to provide transportation, childcare, or home visits as such services relate to parental involvement. So you may want to look into providing childcare for that annual meeting, for example. And do we have any questions? I don't see any in the chat. I'm going to check email really fast here.
There's one in the chat, Erin.
Oh, okay.
Can you share again what we need to do if we need to change our day? And I think That's in reference to the Brustein training because there's a conflict.
Okay. In that case, just go ahead and submit a new registration. And the very last field on the registration form it says like comments or questions, something like that. And just put a little note in there that you need to switch the date that you previously registered. Yeah, I forgot to mention that earlier. That's a good question. Okay, I don't see anything in email. So our upcoming webinar dates for the rest of the year, our next webinar is going to be Thursday, September 29th, as always from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern. And we do always like to remind you at the end of these webinars that we value your feedback and we want to learn more about what's helpful for you, what types of topics and information you'd like to see, not only in our monthly webinars, but also our monthly newsletter. So if you have any comments or ideas or questions, you can send those directly to me if you want, or you can use our anonymous feedback survey. And there's always a link to that in our Title I newsletter, which you can find on our Title I Documents and Resources webpage. So I will stop sharing my screen. And if we don't have any other questions, that's all that we have for you all today. I want to thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next month.